Okay, hello everybody. A little bit of a technical snafu. I have one of our guests, our panelist, might not be able to join because she can't can't get in. This is tech. We love tech, right? Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good. So we're going to roll with it and see if she's able to come on, and that would be Dr. Jandel Allen Davis. She is trying, and I'm not sure what is happening. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But right now, I want to introduce Greg Wathen. He is the president and CEO of the Economic Council for Southwest Indiana. And then we have Andy Boian, who is the president and CEO of Dovetail Solutions. And if Dr. Davis, if she joins us, yay, because that'll be yay for tech. Otherwise, I may add her on to the next one for the following week if she's open, and it'll just be the three of us for now. So we'll go with the flow. Sorry for those who have been waiting. I've been getting messages like, wait, I can't get in. And how do I get to the live? And what's happening here? So people will probably be joining now because they're realizing that that we didn't forget or that they weren't having issues. It was actually just me. So, okay. Here we are. I wanted to bring everybody on because before everything that happened this last week with George Floyd and all those things. It was initially meaning to be focusing on leading through COVID and what that looks like. And the three of you who are going to be on are the folks that are part of the Leadership at Heart community, and also will be making appearances inside of my next book, The Art of Caring Leadership. And so all of that was like, I want to bring the folks forward that are leading organizations that have the ability, that really are people who show heart. And for anybody who's wondering why Andy could be looking down, I know he's texting, trying to figure out how he can
trying to get her on. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's trying to help. Oh, no. Oh, that's funny. I see you on there twice. Why is that? Did you log yourself back in?
Me?
Oh, that's so funny. Because if I put it in it right now, so look, here you go. Well, look at that. Two of you. Woo!
Oh my gosh. One is plenty.
So I think somehow you're double logged in.
Holy cow. Although my voice is resonating, Heather. So it is reverberating.
I think you might be doubly logged in because I see you on here twice. I don't know how, but maybe you're in two different, you've logged in just two times.
Because I have something really important to say.
I gotta make sure I say it. So you can play around with that, and we'll start off. And I'll start off whatever with Greg, and then you can kind of figure out. I'm
sorry, I can't seem to get her on.
Okay, all right. So we'll just kind of keep rolling, and that's how we'll do it. This is what you call being flexible in a nutty little environment. So what right now, I mean, what are some of the things that you, what have you been doing? I mean, now this last week, again, a lot of things have changed. And so, what is it that you have had to do, or you've just chosen to do to meet those you're leading, whether it's your, folks in the community, those, your employees or your customers, to just lead more with heart during this time? I'd like to hear, if there's examples or stories that those are really effective. Greg?
Well, Heather, thanks again for allowing us to be a part of this. I think as in particular region, we're in Southwest Indiana. Evansville is our primary community, and we've had to pivot. I mean, you hear that all the time. You have to make a course correction. That's exactly what we wanted to do, and we wanted to be able to address a lot of the issues for individuals in particular. So one of the things we did collectively as a region is that we've created, like many other regions across the country, a COVID-19 fund specifically for small nonprofits that help lots of other individuals within the broader region of our community. And to date, we've raised more than $5 million to do that very thing. So in a very short period of time, it's coming together collectively and saying, we have a challenge. Are we willing to step up? Because, people are always talking during these kinds of times. Hey, we really need to make a change. We talk about these things. Very rarely do we purposefully actually do it. So those are the kind of things that we've been working on.
Oh, that's awesome. And have you been given your, I know it's more economic development, but have you had any, either request in your local community for, feedback on your part to, there she goes. Woo! She cried. Sorry.
Yay!
I just said, maybe I should forget the computer and use my iPad. So now
sorry, everybody.
Of course, now it's like, I apologize. I was
that's all right.
Stupid. I could
I'm
see
totally
myself,
thrilled.
but all I saw were spinning clocks. It wasn't really working very well.
I'm so thrilled.
Yay! This is Dr. Jandel Allen Davis, and she is the CEO of Craig Hospital. I'm so glad everybody was able to join. I was just asking Greg about kind of what he was doing. So he mentioned stuff that he and a kind of cooperative doing in the region to help with funding nonprofits in the region. And then I asked too if there's anything, as if you received any request as of just these last few days to either make a statement, to do something different, to partner with the African American community. I'm curious, since you're in economic development, Greg, if that's something that's come your way in the last few days.
Certainly. I mean, I think for us in particular, it is really top of mind for everyone during these challenging times. I mean, you couldn't watch those images coming out of Minneapolis and not just be incredibly saddened by what occurred. I think, though, what's interesting, and I'm always a little cautious about it, is we need to do it the right way, because every brand out there, from Twitter to Facebook to Ben and Jerry's, have all said we want to do X, whatever X is going to be, to try to address this. And we always seem to talk a good game, and more importantly, we need to change. And so for us, we've started having those discussions early on as to what can we as a region do. COVID-19 showed us very, very rapidly and very quick order that we can make quick changes. And I think we need to use that same temperament, that same purpose to make changes as we're having a more diverse conversation for our region to change what we're doing here.
One of the things I want that just hit me when I brought Greg onto my podcast, just so you two know and whoever's there, the thing that was just real that attracted me to him was there was a story. So it wasn't him; it was actually one of his team member. It was like a VP or something. I can't remember her name, so I apologize. And she had posted something on LinkedIn where she had to go into a meeting, and she was showing a picture of her CEO like rolling her child around in the stroller because she had to go to this meeting, and it was Greg. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to get him on. How many CEOs are willing to take someone's baby and watch them and stuff while this person's in a meeting? So that's why you're here. So I thank you for those comments. Anybody else want to add, or just, what are you doing right now to show up with heart, to, help your people kind of remain resilient to, with just everything that's going on? How are you addressing it? Who wants to go next?
Doctor?
And hi, Andy. Andy and I were texting, trying to.
I know.
So Andy and I go way back.
I arguably am the hugest fan of Jandel Allen Davis on this planet. So just putting that out there.
It's in some ways, Heather, I'm not doing much differently. I'm acting much differently now than I did before the pandemic. Just doing it more. So what are those things? I'm out and about, walk around, stay connected. I've said since I arrived at Craig 19 months ago, my door is always open. My quote is, I'm the most accessible human I know. And people take me up on that. And so, there's a couple things that the pandemic, at least a couple, have certainly changed in terms of practices. First is figuring out how to use this kind of crazy technology. And so we've sort of settled into this Zoom communications economy, shall we say. But one of the good things that came out of it is that it is a way to stay connected to 1,000 people in an ongoing fashion when you can't bring everybody together in the big gym, which is what we have here, but it's actually been out of operation for that use because we've run out of space and we're using it for actually therapy. So using Zoom, having more, I actually start every one of the meetings. We have a family meeting, a staff meeting, and then a leadership meeting once a week. Now it was every day for several weeks. And I always start with both music, and it's always some, sort of relevant song. So today's song was John Mayer's Say, say what you need to say.
Oh, I love that.
And then I read something that a patient had sent, and one of the team members had brought up to me along with a big old stack of a loaf of baked something that I probably should leave alone. And it was a letter from a patient who was talking about pandemics and endurance, something he'd read in the Denver Post. And, he read this, and then he went on and he talked about the experience, like, wait a minute, this is what I've been doing for 30 years from a wheelchair, right? and he talked about how they navigate in time. I mean, their whole lives in some ways are built on such dependency on others and public agencies and others, and talked about how it builds resilience and fortitude. So, talk about something, and then frankly, in what we've now sort of complicated, inappropriate, and we can talk about the inappropriate ways, but appropriate ways with this righteous protest around the horrible thing we've lived these last 8 days. And I don't have any trouble doing it. I may at 2 a.m. wake up and go, oh my God, did you really do that? But it's really important for leaders to be vulnerable. And here I am, an African-American woman, old physician who's an OBGYN leading a neurorehabilitation hospital. And there's me, and there's a sprinkling of people who look like me in the middle. And then pretty much the people who look like me cook and clean in this building. And so using that as the opportunity to talk about a little bit about the experience of being a mother of 2 African-American kids who aren't kids, one's 32 and one's 29. But to talk about just a little bit about the experience of waking up every day and worrying about and saying to these people and then watching tears, my Black gay son, who I worry about every day, so I think that, and what that has done, and I was talking to one of our VPs this morning, she said, you make it easy to have these conversations. I said, now we got things to do. We got work we have to do while trying to still figure out this pandemic. But this is this kind of, let's not let this good crisis go to waste. So, I think that it's not as hard as we make it, but I think we have that thing called leading with heart. But I think we make it difficult by thinking that there's some archetype of what the leader looks like. And I want to think, to the extent that most leaders are good and smart and kind and compassionate and committed, the way you show up at home is how you should show up at work. And then it works. So that was a very long way of saying what it does is it invites people into all sorts of conversations, and it also allows people to it enables people to feel like they have not just the voice, but they have a constructive voice, and that that it is important that they share what they're thinking about, because none of us know how to do that. Who knows how to run a pandemic? So in any case, that's what I'd say.
Well, it's actually funny that you say that, because it's there'll be experts coming out of that we all know exactly what to do. Like people like Andy and I, we help the best we can our clients, given our background, our experience, our skill set, right? And there's certain areas we're expert in, but this thing that's happening with a combination of COVID and this, these two things, I wouldn't say we're expert in this exact same situation. Now, Andy, I want to go to you because you are more expert in these areas, given that you do work a lot with crisis communication, crisis management. You help in these things, and so I'd like to just come hear your perspective. You lead with heart. So actually, let me go back for a second. Jandel, you are here because number one, I've known you for a very long time. So, and I remember my first interaction with you. I didn't know you, you didn't know me. And I requested, I don't know, it's been 15 years. I don't know. I requested to see you because I was I want to learn more about Kaiser. And I was kind of looking for a mentor, and you were just so full of heart, and you showed right there. And that you probably don't even remember that, but that interaction is what got you on my podcast and got you and keeps you on my radar, because that is how you show up. And so when you described how you were on the show and what you did with your people, and every post I see about you and your people, I'm like, it validates every single reason why you're here. So I want to make sure I don't skip over that. Andy, you and all your brilliance, it's the same thing. I've known you for many years, and we've watched each other, and I've seen you in a leadership role, and I know how much heart you have. And then of course I know that you are, more expert than most in this space. So I'd love to hear your feedback and just kind of what you're facing right now as the CEO of your organization and the community stuff you do, and get your perspective.
Sure. So I think we, as a firm, have worked very hard to be sensitive and aware all the time of not only our clients' needs, but in my opinion, equally as importantly, our team members' needs. And I think oftentimes when for-profit companies get in situations where they see their sales decline, or they see their profit and loss statements look a little different than they did last year, they tend to operate from a place of anxiety and oftentimes even fear. And that leads to, in my opinion, some poor decision making. So what we do as a firm is we are together 3 times a week, not related to client work at all, but we have one session that is meditative, where we spend 45 minutes as a company on Zoom in meditation. The second is a chance for people to be vulnerable and talk about what they're feeling, how they're feeling, what they need, how we as a Dovetail family can help or just be there. And then the third is a fun meeting where we talk about, if you could go anywhere on vacation right now, where would you go and why? So the support around the team is really important. But when you speak about leading with heart, it necessitates you to think about other things than profit or than money in general. And so that's not our first motivation. So when people come to us, companies come to us, nonprofits come to us and say, we need help, particularly right now during the pandemic, and even more recently, given the death of George Floyd and what that has led citizens to do around the country, obviously it screams, if you will, the necessity to be compassionate, be vulnerable, be open, and be willing to listen. A lot of people are talking, not a lot of people are listening. A lot of people are willing to exercise their First Amendment rights peacefully, which we support. Some are doing so in other ways. And I think when it comes down to it, we have 2 crises right now, Heather, that are really almost strangling this community. And I mean the larger community, the country, those that care about issues, those that want to know how to affect change. And we do a lot of encouraging to listen, stop talking, and listen to what they're saying, and be vulnerable enough to accept what they're saying as their true feelings. I tell my children all the time, I have 3 children. I'm married to an African-American school teacher, and she has a daughter. So I have a beautiful stepdaughter who I have grown to love immensely in the last 7 years. And we talk a lot about what has happened in the last 9 days, not just about the incident itself, but about the effects thereafter and what happened before that, and why were Black men hurt, killed, in my opinion, by people in an authoritative situation. What led to that? And if you lead with heart, as Jandel said, if you act the same way at home that you do at work and vice versa, it tends to make you more authentic. It makes you feel it more, and it also helps others heal, in my opinion. Rather than suppress, accentuate. Allow people to express. Allow people to feel what they feel in an environment that they feel safe. And that's been our key. That's been our mantra, and continues to be today, even more so.
That was rather than suppress, accentuate. That is pretty powerful. It'll probably sit with me and whoever's watching right now all the day. And it's like meeting people where they're at, and us being comfortable with just like they say, get comfortable getting uncomfortable. And I think actually I want to say it, Dr. Davis, you may have said that on our podcast interview, and it's true. Like we have to just be willing to sit there, and for people to either be sobbing, to people be angry, like all of those things. And I think folks are looking right now for leaders, for people, just people generally, to show up as compassionate people. And I just recently put out an article. The title is Refuse to Meet Hate at the Door. And the idea with that was my background, just like a kind of a mix up of backgrounds, kind of like your daughter's, Andy, but even more so. And they're inside of me based upon my background, and all of us come with our own filter. There were struggles, and there still continue to be struggles about that background and how then I might see things. But I chose early on, and I choose every time to see people, their reactions to me and how they show up with a lens of like grace. So I give people more flexibility in their responses because I understand that, and many times it's just ignorance. It's a lack of knowledge. It's a fear. And it's also something that maybe had been given to them when they were children. And so being that, like, showing up this way and people making assumptions about me and all those things, I'm used to that, but I don't demonize those people because I do understand where it comes. Like it's not justifying what people are doing. It's absolutely wrong, extremely painful, all of these things, but I understand the root. And so for me, I'm trying to get to the root. And so that's kind of where I'm at in this situation. Is I'm curious to know, let me just see if there's any questions. There was one question I'm gonna put right here on the screen if you can see it, Andy. And it said, how did the meditation group start? Is that something that you suggested or was suggested by staff?
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. I know Elizabeth and she's remarkable. Thank you. The meditation started with me asking my team to set aside, and scheduling this was just short of trying to sign a NATO peace act, trying to get everybody on the same schedule. But once we got everybody on the same schedule, I asked for 45 minutes for people to, with all due respect, set their children with their spouse or with childcare, put down their pens and paper, put down their cell phones, and lay down on their back and close their eyes. And I have done two things. I have invited professional folks in to facilitate meditations, and I have also facilitated them myself. I meditate every morning. Believe me, I need all the help I can get. So I take that time personally. But when our team wakes up or comes to be in 45 minutes or so, they feel remarkably refreshed. They feel forgiven, which I can talk more about if you'd like. But they oftentimes want to be cleansed of all kinds of things. They also want the chance to be at peace during an incredibly tumultuous time. And if I may add just one quick thing, the politics right now of this country is adding yet even a third component of stress and anxiety and pressure to the American public. And so all of that put together, the meditation is something that I started, but I will tell you my team has picked up, and they have brought their own meditations, and we do different meditations all the time. Last week I did a Buddhist meditation. I've never done it before.
Awesome. Greg, you were shaking your head. Did you have something that you wanted to add?
No, I mean, I think that's part of the issue and what we have to address. I mean, it's it's kind of, especially from an economic development standpoint, in most cases, what do we really talk about? We talk about, we have in the past social responsibility or environmental stewardship, but really what we really need to be thinking about, companies in particular, need to help us and help companies bridge the racial opportunity gap. Because it really comes down to economics. So we can talk about everything else, but if there's not economic opportunity for individuals, then it's going to be a challenge for us moving forward. Because we talk about this, there have been cycles through racial divide in our country for more than 200 years, and we go through cycles, and everybody says, "Okay, now we've got it here. We're going to do something else." I hope that, because we know full well there's going to be another disruption at some point in time, that we learn from these current disruptions of what's happening. Because think about, and we were talking about this earlier, Heather, before we got on, we went through, and politically, we went through impeachment, COVID, now this racial unrest within less than 6 months.
That's right.
And talk about being schizophrenic.
Yeah.
How do we address this? And how do we address it? And even when we're calling for this national dialogue, are we even prepared to do what we need to do? Or even just simply listen to hear what somebody else is saying? We will.
That's so smart and right, in my opinion.
I've got a couple questions. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Davis. You do it, and then I'll pose the questions after that.
So a couple things come to mind listening to both these last responses from Andy and Greg. First of all, there's this tendency of leaders in terms of not wanting to get out of their comfort zone, that in times where things are emotionally charged, even just in the day-to-day, let alone what we're living now, is to double down on the agendas and the technical and the this and the that, and sort of go to that space, and not to just sit with how are you doing and just ask the question and sit back. What I know happens when you short shrift the check-in of how people are doing emotionally, to use a military term, you're going to lose the war. And you're going to lose the war because people can't focus then on that technical, because they're still caught up, either emotionally perhaps hijacked, or preoccupied, or scared, or any one of a number of emotions that doesn't allow for the kind of creative and innovative thinking that is needed when you're living in a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. You can't do it that way. So, it's a way that I am. So I heard that, Andy, and even, he said, okay, first day we do this, second meeting we do this. And I thought, and then the third one, he'll say the agenda. It's like, no, the third one we do. I said, I love it, because guess what? The real work will happen off camera.
That's right.
Or off wherever. So let it just, yep. And so we always start meetings that way, of making the space. And then, since I'm an OBGYN, I'm very comfortable with the pregnant pause. So I just sit back and let people, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to give you the time to do what you have to do and say what you have to say, because I think there's people who are also sitting there from the perspective of building trust, waiting to see when she's going to jump in, or he's going to jump in. And if they don't, then they go, oh, they really meant it. They really do want to hear. And you immediately built bridges. And then with respect to Greg, what you said, it triggered for me, it's a construct, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We can't have these sort of, what we're doing right now, I'm going to just tell y'all, and we know it, is a privilege. It is a form of privilege to be able to sit back and have conversation about, what we're observing and what we're experiencing. And there are people who, at this point in our country's history, who may have already been struggling with the ability to put food on their table, find themselves out of work, have lost over 104,000, I'd imagine now, 105,000 Americans in this country, many of whom are in their families. And then many lost their businesses in the last week.
Absolutely.
Literally lost their businesses. So here we are talking about, let's have the conversation, whatever the talk may happen to be. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that many of the folks are still down trying to solve the basics. And I have thought, in terms of the social determinants of health for years, that the most important one is the way out, which is economic opportunity, which is all about, praise your wife, Andy. It's about our crumbling education system. Yeah. We have got to address the uglies that we do not want to address around the disparities and the inequities that exist in how kids are educated, and even beyond kids, how even folks older. So there were two things in that I just had to say here.
I appreciate that. I want to make sure I get to some questions. There were a couple that came out. One from Cynthia: I've returned to work but feel a real disconnect with those few people who had been working after those who had been furloughed. I'm not confident that the feeling will improve. Your suggestions? So it's someone who basically was furloughed, was furloughed, somebody in a group or whatever who were not, they remained behind, and now the people who are furloughed are back to work and feeling a disconnect and wondering what to do. Any ideas?
I think that just one, and I will talk briefly. I think I think what you're experiencing, or the people might be experiencing, is a little survivor guilt, right? I mean, it's the and so I suggest doing some reading about that. And again, you know what you just said so beautifully, throw out to your peeps and say, how are we feeling about this? And have the conversation and allow for the anger and the fear and, you know, what may be envy or jealousies. And for heaven's sake, don't answer the question with data and technical, because you're in an emotional conversation. You are not in a technical conversation. Don't go, well, you know, we had to furlough them because the expense reduction plan required. You know, it's not that. So.
You know, follow up on Dr. Davis's comments.
I'm Jandel, by the way.
Okay. Well, you always be doctor to me.
Never know how to do that. I want to make sure I show respect. So
my children call me Dr. Davis.
There you go. I want to be one of your children. So, I think to Jandel's point is precisely right. But the first thing to do is acknowledge the emotion, acknowledge the feeling as valid. I tell my children all the time, feelings are never wrong. Now, your reaction to them, you may decide to bury them. You may decide to act on them, but the feelings themselves are never wrong. And so if you come back to work in answer to the question and you have feelings of disconnection, that you remember that at the very base of all this, we're all human beings. We all face and feel and touch, taste, smell, all the same types of things, if not exactly similar. And so those that were furloughed that are coming back to those that were not and feeling a little disconnect, the way to open up in a sort of civilized, meaningful way is to address the proverbial elephant in the room and say, how do we all feel about this? And even though things look different and feel differently right now, remember at one time we were all still a team, and we still are. So let's start there and talk about how each of us feel, but validating feelings and ensuring that people feel heard, not talked to, but talked with, and accepting what the reality is 75-80% of the issue. The rest can be worked out in just day-to-day interaction and getting back used to the office environment.
You know, all of you guys' responses, you're really making me look good. Now, you know, I don't believe in perfection. So I'm not trying to paint a picture that everybody here is perfect, but you're making me look good, because this whole, you know, this leadership part thing, I really do believe in it. I believe in caring leadership. And I think just your responses are just examples of that. And are you perfect? Absolutely not. Do we fall back? Absolutely we will. But how we show up, and particularly in times right now, and how you're all describing that by meeting people where they're at and saving those, you know, having those spaces there and pausing. Those are exactly the types of things we need to be doing right now. There's another question that came up. Okay, please tell us how leaders with heart act boldly in the heat of the moment when quick, decisive action is needed now due to bad actions of someone on the team. So I guess, how is that going to show up? Leadership is going to show up when you need to make it as a quick action and someone's not acting right. That's how I see that.
No, Jack Welch said years ago, performance management never should be easy, and we can't run from it. You know, it's the self-talk. It's what I tell myself about, you know, when I'm being glib, I say, that's why you're paid the big bucks. But so that said, what I've always said is, I ask myself, and I've been in this situation so many times I don't want to even think about it, because one time too many is too many in some cases, in some ways, is what am I missing? So if it's the first thing is to make sure that to the extent that it may be aberrant behavior on the part of someone who's usually straight up no chaser and doing their job well, is back to giving them grace, giving them space and benefit of the doubt, is to really explore how'd you find yourself here? How do we find ourselves here, and go to the what am I missing in the picture? So that's about compassion, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's about counseling and consoling if need be. And then obviously if you have to do the hard thing, because there's a pattern of this, there's two things that you have to do. Obviously you have to address that individual, but the bigger thing, and frankly, as we all know, we watched it in living color, or I did last Tuesday night. And then as the story unfolded, to think that a man died at the hands of somebody who had 18 complaints. Then it's about
That's
who's
still
really
a
accountable.
job.
Who's really accountable? How does it get to the point where now we're at a firing, or in his case, far worse, and perhaps no, not perhaps. For I pray those other three. So it's really you do it with compassion. And I have fired people and had them come back and thank me, which is very strange. I have fired people and sent them flowers, which is very strange, because in some cases it's fit, so think about those other things, and don't come from these things from the perspective of bad person. It's often typically fit. And then if it's someone who you have managed, or your manager, or whoever it was, whatever team member it was, has managed not to actually view their primary role in any of these jobs is to actually coach and mentor and grow your successors, right? I mean, I think that's really what it's about, in service to the organization. Then you're looking at the wrong person. If you're looking at that person, you need to go stand in a mirror and take a long, hard look at and examine your own leadership practices and your policies in your workplace.
That's good. Thank you. Greg, what about you? You got anything to add to that?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I could really add anything to it. I think we find ourselves just in incredibly strange times, and you really do need to look at it if you want to get back to whatever normalcy that we thought we had. Is you have to address these issues. And what would you do if the COVID-19 hadn't occurred, or if the issue has not occurred in Minneapolis? An issue came up, how would you deal with it? And you probably need to deal with it and look at it in some cases the same way you did prior. So it's not to say that you can't necessarily make that pivot, but you really need to think through this. I mean, for us, it's simple things. Our team, we had some of our team members come back and said, hey, why don't we just do a simple lunch? We took them out to a restaurant, making sure everybody felt comfortable doing that very thing, because I know in some states you can't do that as of yet. We said, we're going to go out and we're just going to have the experience, and we're not going to really talk about anything, just to see how they're doing, and just doing the kind of things we did in the past. And that sort of relieves some tension, because so many of us are doing Zoom meetings, or we're doing LinkedIn Live. We're doing just the technology is overwhelming. And from that standpoint, you've just got to take a deep breath, take a step back and saying, okay, what is it that we want to accomplish? What are we doing? What is the challenge that is facing us? And how do we collectively try to address it? But at some point in time, that person, in many cases, it'll be me. I have to say, here's the decision we make, and here's the reason why, and be comfortable with it.
But it seems like in that moment, you've made the decision, but you've also listened a lot. So you've taken in a lot of the voices, and then someone has to make a decision. And so that's, that ended up being you.
Especially now, you really have to listen to a lot of voices, because it could very well be they're telling you something entirely different. Maybe something's going on within the family unit itself. I mean, think about what we did. We artificially shut down the economy. We are forcing people in these stay-at-home orders in some states not to. If you're not essential, you're staying at home, and you're spending a lot of time with your family. And what happens when you have issues that and God forbid, you hate to see these kind of things happen, but there's been just a lot of abuse of children abuse in terms of what's happened of just forcing all these things to occur. So you need to think what's happening within the market. I mean, even some of our team members, when I talk to them, hear what's going on, what's happening with your family, how are your children, how are they doing? Just simply asking that question. And I know it may not be perfect, especially with HR, where you can't really talk about the family. These are the times where you really need to ask, how is someone feeling? What are their emotions? What are they going through, to better understand how we can address at least how we work together moving forward.
Anything to add from you too? Because I do have one more question. I have another question that was posed, but anything? Okay, I'll put that on here. Okay. So Elizabeth back says, I really identify with leading from heart and being vulnerable with employees. I'm beginning the stages of a job search. Any thoughts on how I ensure that a potential company will be a good fit for me?
Oh, yeah. if I can jump in on that, because I'm deeply passionate about this. Similar to Jandel, when I terminate people, I open up a bottle of champagne and we toast to their next adventure. And it tends to both let the sting out a little bit, but it also shows, it gives the respect they deserve. But on the front side, when you are in a job search and looking for the right leader or the right company, I always go back to this quote that says, great leaders don't set out to be a leader. They set out to make a difference. It's never about the role. It's always about the goal. And if you are able to interview as much as they interview you in the job interview, you'll have a leader that will listen to you and answer your questions, talk about the culture of the company, talk about what's important to him or her, why it is, the foundations of how they built it, and not at all be concerned with the hierarchical part of the company or the nonprofit or the NGO. They're more concerned about how you would interface with the boss as a colleague, not as a subordinate, and also how quickly they can help you assimilate into an environment that keeps you comfortable, safe, feels valued, and understands that your work and your willingness to come every day is as much a burden to them to get up and come to work as it is a gift to them about having you there.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, there's science around what I'm about to say. And it may, and we can put some technical and some other to-dos or hows to on the other side of this comment, but you have to follow your gut. I mean, and there is more and more science that says that, we think the head is where we are making these sorts of decisions, but that intuition, which has actually literally your gut feel when we say that is important. When I walked into Craig Hospital to interview for this crazy role in May of 18, when I walked into the hospital, and that was second round interviews, first round were done off site, I walked in and I could feel that this was a place I wanted to be. And you need to, so tap into the physiologic. Do not underestimate that. The second thing I've learned over time, and it was when I applied for the regional president role. I'll tell everybody out here at Kaiser Permanente and was a finalist, but alas, it didn't happen. What I remember about that amazing gauntlet of interviews, where I'm out in California twice interviewing with people who I knew, but all the mucky mucks of KP. I realized walking out of the first one of those interviews, I said, oh, a really good interview is nothing more than a great conversation. And so if it doesn't have that conversational feel where you're being asked questions, but it's an opportunity and you're asking questions, but it should have somewhat that kind of feel. If it has this rote sort of feel, it tells you something about the company's attention to, or the organization's attention to, how they're actually coaching and mentoring and growing their leaders, that they haven't sort of talked to them about how you actually do good interviewing, as opposed to, just reading the questions and next question kind of thing. So that's the second thing I'd say. And all of that is predicated on you being somewhat clear, but only somewhat clear about what it is you want to do. I mean, I think the crazy thing about life is that we actually think we're in control, but we're kind of not. And so letting go of some of that and allowing, that whole notion of throwing it out to the universe and seeing what happens, because trust me, this was not what I ever saw myself having the privilege and honor of doing, is another part of it. But it does at least require you to say, let me identify what's the culture in which I think I can flourish and grow. and then you have the ability to then step out and start to interview. So those are the things I would add. And none of that was very technical. So.
From my perspective, I just think that there's opportunity. If there's opportunity right now because a lot of times, sometimes they may not see the opportunity as they're going out and interviewing. I do think there's opportunity at the moment, and it will probably continue. And that opportunity may not necessarily be in their own community. It may be somewhere else. COVID-19 has told us in particular, I think people are looking and reevaluating where do they want to live. So in that particular case, and where opportunity might arise from that. Think about what happened prior to COVID-19 in particular, in most cases around the state of Indiana, and that we had a struggle just to find people, just to find talent. And now I think though this opportunity, because it gives us a perfect opportunity for us to reset. And I think I would tell her not to be discouraged. I do think just going in and just demonstrating the value that you have to offer to your team, there will be opportunities that will arise, in particular in tertiary markets like ours.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm highly cognizant of time. And so here's what I want to do just to wrap up. I value and care for all of you. And so I want to just end with one thing. Thank you, Andy. Okay, so maybe in a couple sentences, 3 sentences, so we can end on time for you guys. What would be maybe your final thought for those who are, watching now and who will watch later? This will be recorded. Who are, just looking for that source of inspiration, a way of showing, that they care more during this time. What could you maybe bring energy to that for them in a few sentences each? Let's start with Andy.
Shoot, I was going to piggyback off what Jandel was going to say. I think there's a song that my family listens to called "Humble and Kind," and I teach my kids every day. Those are the words they ought to be thinking about every day, and approach situations, approach opportunities, and to fellow colleagues as well. Always approach it with humbleness and kindness. And even if you're surprised, sometimes in a not good way, by a reaction or response, you started off the right way. And I think one of the best ways you can do leading with heart is to remember you are one of, and I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody, but you are one of God's children. And so is he, so is she. And if you lead with that and you think about your place in the world and how important each of us are to one another and to our community, you win.
Thank you so much. Jandel?
What I'd say the way to get through this is, despite the irony in what I'm about to say, is resist the tendency or the desire to isolate during these isolating times. Stay connected to friends, stay connected to folks at work, whether you're working from home or wherever the heck you're working from. So we need to strengthen the ties at this time. Second, which is one I try to live by for the most part, is secure your own oxygen mask before you go out to help others. So this is a time to double down on self-care in whatever way that looks like. And the third is that despite the fact that we are in one of, I'll cop to it, 62 years on the planet, the most ambiguous time I've ever lived in, or the most confusing time that I've ever lived in or through. What optimism is fueled by is a strong need to sense make. And as leaders, that's our job, is to remember that what followers need are hope, compassion, stability, and trust. And there's some technical ways that you make sure that's happening in terms of how organizations are run or workplaces are run. But the bigger is that there's love. I mean, the words in that sort of soft, which is really hard way that we show up as hopeful, compassionate, stable, and trustworthy leaders. So that's what we need, and that therefore keeps people feeling, and I've heard it walking the halls of the hospital from folks, they say, you make us feel safe. And that's what I'd say. So.
Thank you. Greg?
Well, it's, I always change is inevitable. and you need to be able to embrace it. It's, typically it's, I always look at, is it easier for us to change and the status quo? And a lot of times is that the status quo is more painful than making the change. And you just need to be flexible from that. There's Walt Kelly, who created the comic strip Pogo, during the first Earth Day, created a thing, and he had this comic strip says, "We met the enemy, and it's us." And I really truly believe this. Change, you do it in your neighborhood, in your community. I'm not looking for change in Washington. I mean, I just don't. I think I'm not saying it's unbroken. It kind of is. I really think if you really want to change the world, you start by a neighborhood, by a community, and if you can do that very thing, then you've changed lives within people in your neighborhood, then you've done an incredible thing. And I would encourage people to continue to think in that manner.
Thank you, everyone. So everybody just out there, if you're still there, the three of you have made me proud. Like I said, you just have shown up. And here's the thing, we all get a choice how we show up. And we get to choose how people see us and how we interact and how we make them feel. And so today you've uplifted me, and I'm sure those who are watching. So thank you so much. And take this all with you guys today. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Thanks.
Bye now.